Hello everybody and welcome to the Quest On Show. Today's episode is about spiders and the alphabet. I have a long fascination with spiders like many others, and I will today endeavor to explain some of the coolest things that I know archetypally about spiders. And I'll be explaining how the Arcane Arcade spider game board works. Before we get to that though, I wanted to begin with an explanation of why spiders. Last time I was making a video on April Fools, and while I was spinning, afterwards, I said that spiders are known in Native American lore to have been bringers of the alphabet. Something like Charlotte's Web, where the shapes of the webs created letters, and these letters gave human beings the ability to interact at a higher level. So says my Native American medicine card book, where the spider is concerned. And although this seems maybe minor, I did find a bigger reason to expand upon this discussion, and that is in the observation that the internet that I'm speaking you to right now is called the World Wide Web. And the World Wide Web is, of course, related to spiders, so we have this synchronicity between the letter bringer and now the web, because what is the internet? It's really a bunch of, numbers or word letters all stringed together to create this kind of, virtual reality that we're creating and hanging out with each other through. And I thought that was pretty interesting because I think that also aligns with many of the other properties associated with spiders. Presently I'm reading The Origins and Histories of Consciousness by Erich Neumann, which is a phenomenal book. And right now I just finished the chapter on the Terrible Mother, and I learned that the spider is associated with the Terrible Mother. And that's, first of all, you should know, we'll get to that. The mother, in this mythology represents the stage, the Terrible Mother stage, after the Ouroboros stage of being in the womb, when everything is complete unto itself. And as you begin to evolve, as societies begin to evolve and they begin to break out of that Ouroboros pattern of being one with nature, it's a very intimidating time. And there's a huge level of threat perceived from nature, which can overwhelm the psyche very easily, and so it gets projected as this Terrible Mother archetype. And why spiders? Well, in this situation, the spiders are the they eat their own children when they're born. This is often what happens. So there's a devouring mother aspect of this, and I found this is interesting when we think about the internet in some ways, because I think there's certainly some cause to believe the internet is devouring us because we become so enmeshed in it. We're so completely taken in. In psychology, anything that has depth to it is associated with the feminine. So we're caves, the womb, the tomb, boxes. These are containers, and so we are led deeper. And I think that is what it is with the web. I think the web is like a container, and we are being led deeper and deeper into that. Now, what's interesting is that, where are things trending? Well, things are getting deeper, and it does seem like I've heard we're moving towards this, metaverse type program where, the ideal, I guess, is they're trying to make it like Ready Player One, which is one of my favorite movies ever. If you haven't seen it, you have to go see it. And especially get it in, big screen mode as much as you can. It will blow your mind, but that is the definition of what they're working towards, a complete virtual reality experience. And I think this is also kind of suggestive of what the spider does, which is, lure its prey in and then cocoon them, creating an isolated kind of virtual, container. And I think that is, something to be keeping in mind. The devouring mother aspect represents the open chasm. And so what we have to be able to do is close that chasm, be able to shut the box, shut the lid of the coffin, be able to move on, because as long as it stays open, it has this sort of underworld lure feel to it. And I think this is what my message is then about the internet and spiders, is that be willing to turn off the internet, step away from your phone, get out in nature. Don't always be connected, because if you're always connected, you're going to be increasingly enveloped by it, especially as these technologies get stronger. I every night turn off my Wi-Fi, and I do it for any kind of a special event. I keep the Wi-Fi off. But today I wanted to do a video because it's Father's Day, and it's been 2.5 months, and I've been so busy with all my projects around the land, doing garden beds and getting firewood together, and got a new addition. So I've been real busy, but today is my day, so I've been able to chat with you, and I decided finally I get to do this spider video. So yeah, moving on to this other aspect I wanted to share. I just finished reading Dave Edgar's book, The Every. This is it right here. Really highly recommended that. That book is a sequel to the movie, to the book The Circle, which he wrote. And this book, I didn't read The Circle, but I read The Every, and I loved it. It's the funniest, darkest book I've ever read. I was laughing so hard, and very, very excellently. It's what it is it's a story about how like social media and like e-commerce are becoming together. It's kind of like what would happen if Facebook and Amazon merged like within 50 years. And then, you know, the whole of society is like living in this, you know, social network basically. And just lovely written. It's actually the main character is someone who enters the corporation, the Every, which used to be the name of the Circle, and then tries to, you know, subvert it and try and ruin it. And I won't explain why, but it's so good. But you know, one of the interesting theories that runs in this book is about the properties of us all watching one another. One of the comments that comes up is that a watched human being can't be free, because you know when you're being watched, you're not going to behave however you want. You know, you're so. But the concepts in the book bring both the positive and the negative to that. You know, like we're solving problems by increasing it, but also at the same time, the level of free will we have is shrinking and shrinking. And I think this is also, again, something interesting to bring up about the spider, in that they have like 8 eyes. And whenever I see spiders, I think that might be one of the reasons why they're so freaky. You know, there's a lot of other bugs out there with many legs, like for instance the centipede, which are, you know, very intense. But I think there's something we all recognize about spiders that's especially, you know, off-settling, and I'm guessing it's 8 eyes. Like imagine if I just had 8 eyes right now, you know, I'd be talking to you and it would take you a moment or two or more. And so I think that's something that might be having to do, because the eyes of the spider right now, I'm suggesting, represent this mutual surveillance that we're like putting on one another all the time, you know, as part of this web metaphor that I'm, you know, sharing. So yeah, I think it's maybe interesting too to think about like how if we're watching each other all the time, you know, what's the difference between, you know, being watched and being seen? Because, you know, that's something I think is interesting to maybe draw a line for, you know, like for instance, we want the benefit of, you know, being seen, but maybe we don't want to be watched, you know. So maybe I'm thinking that if something never turns off and it's always watching, I think that, you know, I mean, it's not really seeing you, it's more watching you. Yeah, I think that something about the property of seeing means also having been seen. So I think there's that sharing that's going on. Yeah. So I think that's an important hallmark. You know, if someone's watching you, you should be able to see them. You know, if someone's seeing you, you should be able to see them. I think that's the level of transparency that might help. And I guess also, you know, allowing for darkness. I mean, the question is, you know, is this new site of the internet allowing us to see into darknesses that we're not supposed to see, at least together? You know, I believe people should have an interior darkness, because then it'll allow for true light to come out. You know, if everything is light, then that's blindness. So, you know, we really have to be able to honor both sides of that equation. Okay, so next up on my topic about spiders, I wanted to share something else about spiders. We'll jump right to my spider guy. You probably saw this in the intro. I made this with gel pens, okay? And it's a cutout of Camille d'Erico's, right there. Camille d'Erico's Cute and Creepy coloring book. I love coloring in my free time. I really recommend if you're looking for a new hobby to pick up some coloring. I'll have some links below for really the best sets you can get. Gel pens especially. My spider guy there, he glows neon under the black light, and it's super cool. And I put a little Z on the back of him, and that was just something I was just like, oh, what am I going to do for the spider back? I want to make some kind of a symbol so it has a feeling tone to it. And I just got inspired to do a Z. I was going to do a question mark. You know, I'm the Quest On channel. I love question marks. But I kind of saw like, oh, if I make it like question mark on both sides, it'll turn into a Z. And then I started wondering more about the properties of the Z and how it would relate to this spider. So I named my spider, which is something I always like to do when I create something that's so awesome. This one's name is Zenny, short for Zenith, because I think that the word Zenith kind of is like the keystone word of the Z's, because Z and A is like mostly known for ascension. I have this funny story that happened with me and my dad a while back. He was into trying to figure out where these patterns would lie too. It's where I get some of it from, and it is Father's Day, so talking about that. And he's like, what would the A word be? And I was like, that's simple. It's ass. And he's like, real cool, Jeff, saying that. Jeez, I'm serious here. And I'm like, okay. What about ascension? And he's like, perfect. That's definitely the A word. And I'm like, it begins with ass. And anyways, he was miffed by that. And I loved the whole story of it. But and to shorten it up, I'm seeing that the ascension energy of the A is something that represents the A. Hopefully I'm not losing you here, but if you're familiar with like the shape of the A, it really does like look like, it's like the pyramid shape of the I. And that gets its definition, by the way, the dollar bill, from Akhenaten. It goes all the way back to ancient Egypt, and he's the golden eye. And it represents the time and astrotheology when the sign of Aries, which is associated with the ram and the rising sun, became prominent in the zodiological procession of the equinoxes, which lasts for 2,000 some years. We're entering the age of Aquarius now, so we're like 3 cycles beyond that. And so what that represents is like the birth of like the sun from the night, which before that was like Taurus, which is like an earth sign, and then, it's more dark, and then the Aries is fire. And so anyways, this A is associated with the ascension energies, and you'll see that A motif in a lot of other places, the shining of the light coming up over the horizon, especially in media corporate logos. The media itself, the word media, refers to a branch of magicians who go back to Babylon. And that's an interesting thing too. But, I guarantee you look at like probably 8 out of 10 media logos have this feature. And it's that the sun is somehow implied to be rising over the horizon. The Universal Studios has the whole planet, and then over the edge, the sun's rising up. Sony has the O, and it's suddenly like shining off the side. Lionsgate, it's got that in the sky, the gate of the lion, which is the sun. And it just goes on. Why are they all doing that? Just so you know, it's actually a form of mind control, because the rising of the sun, from a psychological perspective, is really associated with the dawn of God. Carl Jung has a great story about this in Dreams, Memories, and Reflections, where he went to visit natives, and they literally experienced like the rising of the sun on the horizon is like the rebirth of God itself, and they offer their hands up to it, and they really feel like it happened, a part of them. They made sacrifices. That's how deep it goes into it. And this is because it casts off the darkness of the night before, all the personal dreams that they've been having, and it makes everyone share this reality experience. And in that same way, when they create that logo, you see it at the beginning of a movie, it's really implying like, here's a new day, here's a new world for you to enter into. And it's kind of a control factor, because you don't know that you're being shown this image, and so you get sucked into it a bit. And that's their goal. But as important as that is to know about, I think we should also know about the Z. Once again, Zenny here. All right, he's a wolf spider, by the way. And I love these wolf spiders. They remind me of, just like if their spiders were cool, the coolest spiders, these are these guys. They look like little tanks jumping around. Love those. Anyways, so Z would represent the opposite of A, and I think that it's interesting to compare, like if A is associated with God, then you'd think Z is associated with the devil. But it's interesting because in the alphabet, you don't have that kind of a duality, which is a really insidious form of thought that just goes through just about everything. Instead of thinking of, A, or like the devil is the opposite of God, what if you think of like Z is the opposite of A, and what does Z symbolize? And this is where I was following this pattern to, I saw Zenny as like the zenith, the highest point that you can go. And I think that's pretty cool to kind of ponder, because the A is the ascension, and the Z would be, that topmost point. And in this way, I think that it might imply that like the alphabet, which in my previous episodes I explained that the alphabet was kind of derived from the stars, based on like constellations, and that's where like the letters are like our inner stars. And I was thinking that like the Z at the highest point, represents like the alphabet coming from like the furthest most reaches. Okay. And I think that represents something like, the alphabet is almost descending towards us. Like A is maybe not the first letter, it's the last letter You know, it's the first one we see, but it's the last one that was created. Z is like the beginning. And yeah, I think there's a lot of, you know, stuff to go on. I'm really bouncing around here with some different ideas. So the Z is, for example, the sound that people make when they snore. And I find that was interesting because it's, you know, like, why do we do that? I don't know. It doesn't sound like zzz, does it? I guess a little bit. But there's also some nah, some like N noises, and then some g and some a. But we just went with Z. And yeah, I think that's interesting because it's like the realm of sleep. It's the realm of the unconscious. And we see that in the association of sleep with death. Because every night when we go to sleep, it's like a little death, and, you know, we don't really know what's on the other side of it when we go down, but we still, you know, do it. And we have to do it just like death, you know, because people, if they don't get sleep, they do die. That's an interesting thing. You need it, like, I don't know exactly how long, but I'm guessing like a week or so. I think you could maybe last without any sleep at all, and then you actually do go and die, which I think is a very interesting point too, as a proof of, you know, their need for balance. You know, what do we do when we sleep? It's something that's extremely important. But if sleep's also associated with death, then death is very important for life. And this is something that we see in other ways as well, where everything in life feeds on death, you know, except for maybe plants in the sun. But I don't know, the sun seems like maybe the ultimate kind of a death. It's a nuclear explosion that's destroying lesser particles to make bigger ones, and then the radiation that comes off of the sun is what creates the light. But anyway, the Z is the symbol, I guess, of the sleep world, which is the opposite of the conscious world in many ways. James Hillman, a depth psychologist who is like a kind of a predecessor, or I'm sorry, a successor to Carl Jung, he wrote this book called Dreams and the Underworld. And he suggests that like the symbolisms of dreams have to be interpreted through the experience of through the lens of like an underworld experience. So like taboos, dreams often have like things that are taboo, and that's what the underworld experience is often about. But largely the aspect that I found most interesting was that it's like the opposite of the egoic. Everything that applies to the ego is like turned off in the underworld experience of dreams. So, you know, multiplicity, things double and have ambiguity, whereas, you know, the ego's trying to stay strong and straight and narrow, like an A, you know, like pure. But then the Z is like this blending of all these different experiences together. And yeah, so I think that is like this idea again confirmed, you know, this like unconscious and the conscious have this contrast. And I feel like Z is maybe like a gateway to discovering what that has to do with, as shown by the, you know, snoring symbol. And yeah, I find, you know, that snoring is like perhaps a kind of, you know, a way of speaking in the dream world. I don't know if you've ever noticed someone who snores, depending on like what their state of mind is, but sometimes people snore louder when they are stressed out. And maybe that's a physiological thing, but I think it's also a psychological thing as well, because people talk in their sleep as well. And I think that snoring might be kind of like a language of sleep. And especially, I think it has this particular function of like pushing energy out, because sometimes snoring gets to be sounding like the Tibetan monks who growl to create these bassy noises, and this is actually supposed to drive out demons. So I think that it's possible that some types of snoring are like intended to, you know, be like a way of like cleansing. So the part that I am not, you know, totally sure about is the physiological component of snoring, but I do have one brief story about that, and it's that I tried nasal strips before, and the nasal strips prevented me from being able to snore, but I still felt like something was off in my waking day, and I'm guessing it might be because I wasn't getting to snore. And thankfully I don't snore very much, but yeah, I can't use those strips. So anyways, the Z of the spider I've shared with this underworld experience, but I feel like, okay, if Z is the last letter of the alphabet, maybe there could be more letters in the alphabet. You know, Z is kind of a mystery, and I think that it's important maybe for us to, you know, consider what other sounds or, you know, ideas could be encapsulated in letters, because they're so rich in meaning. And I actually have invented a letter that I'll share with you. It's called the Nun, and it's actually a circle with the line through it, and it makes the sound of. Okay, that's because it's the finger over the lips. Quiet. Okay, silence. It's that particular sound. And so if you were like making words, you can use this letter to create a silent sound between the words that is not a separation but a connection through silence. And so, for instance, you might have heard, maybe you didn't know, peanut butter is actually two words, peanut butter, as if like you're like, pass me the butter, and like, did you mean the peanut butter? No, they really, I felt like they should be one word, but if you have the nun, you can put that between the two, and you can be like peanut butter. There's a peanut butter, there's that that space that's there. And yeah, I think other languages like Hebrew, for example, have a sound for silence that's quiet. It's interestingly enough, it's ayin, which is their 15th letter, and it's associated with it's called the eye, like as in like the shape, like that's the actual eye of a person. And it's also associated with the devil in the tarot because it's the 15th letter, and so the devil is the 15th archetype in the tarot. And yeah, I feel like we should all be able to, invent things and develop stuff because, that's the essence of authenticity, is to be able to, take what we're given and, do something new with it. I think that's how we express ourselves and, be ourselves. And so, yeah, I encourage you to try and play around with this particular letter, because the whole property of letters allows us to access reality. I think that's a fundamental thing we have to understand, is that language is like our access key to like infinite worlds. And yeah, that's why we need to have like maybe like different acceptable, like being able to accept other types of letters that represent things that we consider important. The noon is my way of helping us to bridge that gap in English, because it probably has an impact on our own world by not being able to accept silence as a way of communication. We feel so driven to explain everything, but maybe things can be better explained without saying anything at all. So I think that we should also appreciate the value of letters at an even deeper level. Like for instance, by not just making them, but also maybe understanding them as like fundamental like units of consciousness. The artist Rammellzee is who I'm going to talk about now, and you'll see that he actually has a lot to do with the idea of spiders and this conversation about the alphabet as we go on. So who is Rammellzee? He is an artist from the 80s. He was in New York making graffiti in a really interesting way that's called Iconoclast panzerism. He also was a hip-hop singer. I'm sorry, he sung rap. Apparently, his rap record that he put out is like considered to be the most valuable like record in all of rap. He was also close friends with Basquiat, and he isn't very well known. But I learned about him through a magazine called Juxtapose a while ago, and I found him very fascinating because he would like rearrange letters when he made his graffiti in a way that was designed to like create different effects with the letters. So the interesting thing that he says is like the monks of way back in the Middle Ages, the Trappist monks would make like letters, the iconoclast movement, that became so ornate, in the Bibles they were creating, that the government couldn't read what they were doing, and they forced them to stop. And this was Rammellzee's interpretation, that the real power is in the people who control the letters. And so he took full control of like letters, and he believes that like letters contain a secret cipher that like has been like waiting to be released. And he actually thought that the letters themselves like had character, like the characters, like what we use to describe a letter like in another language or our own character, actually has a particular character. And I think this is very cool to consider, because I definitely think that words have a type of energy associated with them, because words take us all the way back to wherever those words were first come up with. For instance, I'm just thinking of word right now, and I heard the word verd. I'm starting to hear it go way back. It's some kind of like Nordic type thing that has to almost sound like weird, and so words are weird. And yeah, there's a weirdness that is certainly there about words. But and every time you use a word, or say the word, it gets weirder. And in that way, we're, creating a new reality, and that's definitely what words do. And newness is one of the weirdest things there is. And yeah, the point about letters, though, I thought was cool that Rammellzee brings up is that, they have this like ability to be changed and manipulated into different characters, and this is his movement of iconoclast panzerism. And yeah, so there's something cool about what he was doing, though, with his graffiti art that I thought I should share with you. This is a quote from him. "The trains out there are a big book, and the pages are being written. Formations are being placed on the train. The page cars are switched around, and the book is scattered and rescattered into a gamble. The letters armored themselves while we were scattering them on the transit, and society was still playing that big major game by breaking up car numbers in sequence. When you put two cars together, it makes an ionic sentence, a one-word statement of sentence, full of five of these one-word joints. And these sentences started to make sense." So what he's describing is him and his friends made these words. And here, let's see here. There's this other part is, how can I do it if I don't know what I'm doing? The lines came to me in the dark. I drew because of anxiety, desperation, third rails and cops. I made quick decisions. I just said, fuck it, do this, do that. And if it came out right when I saw it the next day, it came out right. I was amazed. When I studied it and I knew what it was, then I put the elaborations into it. Graffiti was created in the dark, where you can't feel, when you can't touch. You're not going to concentrate or manipulate nothing. You're worried about 20 gaping holes in the floor, dogs chasing you all over mad and muddied up. The most gothic looking things around down in these tunnels. So the idea is here is that in the dark, when he's doing this graffiti work, which was illegal, he was creating these words, and then the next day they'd see what they were creating together. And then they were doing them on trains, which would get shifted around. And then when they got broken up and put back together, it created these compound sentences of meaning. So he started seeing like the living language of the city come alive in the graffiti he was doing, which was known as Iconoclast panzerism, which is the successive graffiti movement to the wild styles like type. And so iconoclast panzerism, I said earlier, gets this idea from the Trappist monks who were doing iconoclast lettering. And then panzerism is German for armoring. And so he literally had this idea that he was like strengthening the actual characters of letters to make them like more powerful and turning them into kind of like tanks that had the ability to like throw over the military industrial complex, was his like message. That, and he even tried to offer his services to the government, be like, I can be in on this and help you to make use of the power of letters. And they didn't offer him, but he also was working against authority as well at the same time. So one of these people who is really just a bit of everything at the same time. And so yeah, I hope that you get to know Rammellzee, because he's a fascinating guy, and his art is super, super cool. My thing that I was most impressed by is his like Gundam suits that he makes out of like trash. I thought that's so cool. And yeah, very inspiring. But if you're going to do that work, I recommend that you wear a face mask, because he did pass away from health complications related to breathing in different types of fumes that he could have avoided if he had worn a mask. So good news on that. You can be prevented. But the whole thing about Rammellzee and what he's doing with graffiti, I think has a lot to do with spiders at the deepest level, because he was working around in the dark, and he was doing his stuff in places he wasn't supposed to be, and he then created these like almost like spider web words that come up. And that's a lot of times what graffiti looks like. It's like the cobwebs of the city. They creep up and people do them, and then they have to be taken down like a cobweb. And the lettering is kind of like, it's from some species of the night that we, don't usually see. And, most of the time it's not really good looking. And I think that's probably true for most spider webs. But some graffiti artists really do nail it, and Rammellzee was one of them. And he was creating this art to on the whole to empower the actual language to become, somewhat autonomous and to be able to take back its own powers. And you have to read about Rammellzee if you want to see how he describes all of that. But I think that concept of using language to like liberate, letters to liberate, is actually found in the very root of spiders in the arachnid myth, the myth of Arachnia. And this is one of the Greek myths, and Arachnia was a woman who was like doing her tapestries and like, or what was like doing a weaving, and she was like, this is a great weaving, and Athena walked by and she was like, do you think you could do one as good as Athena? And she's like, yeah, of course, I'm so great. And she's like, well, guess what? I'm Athena, and I'm going to challenge you to a weave off, and I'm going to make the best tapestry ever. And so they had this competition, and Athena did a tapestry of like Zeus, like, being all tough and strong and, whatever, whereas Arachne did one of Zeus, like raping the women and, being a total dickhead, and also did it with an even better like level of quality than Athena's. And so Athena was so pissed, she beat the shit out of Arachne and then turned her into a spider. And like, or I think actually what it was is she beat on Arachne so hard, and then that Arachne actually killed herself and hung herself, and then she was turned into a spider. And then that's why spiders hang by threads or something. But this is interesting because it shows that the original like form of like artistry of like making like cloth like that was like how they were telling their language, and she got turned into a spider, and which is like almost like the language she was doing was like a kind of graffiti, like a protest. That's what she decided to make, was an image of how unfair the gods were, and then the gods punished her very unfairly for doing this, for her ability to surpass them, especially, I think is the main thing to note. And so that is an interesting side note about the actual history of the word Arachne. It goes back to this myth of arachnid, which is the order of spiders. It goes back to Arachne. And yeah, so that's what I feel like Rammellzee kind of does with graffiti, and I think that is the power of the word, is that, anyone who learns how to use it can start to access these different realities. And yeah, let's see here. I think the last thing I really wanted to do is talk about the Arcane Arcade gameboard, which is made like a spider web. Now, if you've been paying attention, I've made a whole tarot game based around turning the elements and the archetypes of the tarot with some hand gestures into this fun interactive game. And the game involves making a gesture like TAR, and then you pick one of the gestures that's from that like collection, and then you check the elemental property of the gesture you made. I made the magician, which is the only one that makes a noise. It's a snap, and that's fire. The magician's like a fire archetype, and then fire beats all the earth ones, and the earth beats all the air ones, and air beats all the water, and water beats all the fire. So that's how the game works. And what happens is when you win, generally you just figure out like how people are playing the game. I usually just study another person's archetype to understand where they're going to be at, because anyone you pick of all the hand gestures that stand out to you are going to really help you kind of get an idea of where you're at right now, because of the power of synchronicity. And the power of synchronicity is anything that's happening in a single moment is like has meaning for everything else happening in that moment, is the general principle. So when we both make a gesture together, we're actually in that moment, the meaning is charged to, what our experiences are, because we're playing with archetypal forms. And so when you win though, if I won with the magician, the fire archetype, then if you're playing the full board game mode, you get to put a token right there in the red form, and then if you get 4 reds, you win in that column. And then you're trying to get, there's a blue one for the water, and then there's a yellow one for the air, and a green one for the earth. Okay, so the idea is to get basically 16 wins, 4 in each, and if you get 4 wins in each category, you fill them all the way up on your own board. That's when you win the game. And your opponent's trying to do that before you on their side of the board. And if you get all of your 4 all the way maxed out, if I got all the fire, then you can actually start invading your opponent's side. And every time you win a fire, and you get to go into your opponent's fire. And if you get 4 of your tokens in your opponent's element, you completely cover their element to its base at the very top, then you have conquested them and you win. So basically the game is twofold. You know, you can either get all 4 elements with 4 tokens in each, or you can pick one element and go all the way into your opponent's side and then beat them on that element. And so it creates some great game dynamics because you're trying to, you know, get whichever, you know, elements you're missing, or you're trying to push on a certain element. So you can kind of try and play against each other to see, you know, I'm going to guess that you're going to pick this, and I'm going to take this one. And so it really makes the game pretty dynamic at the very end about, you know, who could win it. And it really means it could go either way at any point. So a lot of fun to be had on that. And yeah, that's how you play Arcane Arcade as a game board. Like I said, I don't recommend you get there until you're able to just play it in like a free-form sense and just kind of pick up on the themes that are happening synchronistically. But if you want to turn it into a full-length game, I've included how to do that in my book, and also shared templates for making that game board that you just saw me put up. And yeah, it's based on the image of a spider web, and I guess that's just because it also complements the theme of Arcane Arcade, because an arcade is a series of arches, and so that's also like what the shape of the spider web is, a bunch of arches mixed together. And yeah, I think that fits well with the whole idea of an archetype, because an archetype represents a kind of like arching theme that exists, you know, in the human experience. So that's also a good way to explain that together, so they fit. And now I want to tell you the last thing about spiders, and it's that I once had this cool dream where the concept of spiders came up. It was back in 2017, I think, and it was this time where I saw my cousin in a dream, and he said, you know, love is a rainbow-colored spider. And he's a year older than me, and actually he passed away within a month or so of me getting that dream from him. And we didn't talk too much at this point, but we were really good friends earlier. And I just remember this dream that I had is almost like that's his goodbye message to me. You know, he got it out of the way before he had crossed over. And because we kind of all sense these things coming ahead of time because, you know, the way that synchronicities work, the timelessness of the unconscious. So, like I said earlier, by the way, dreams in the underworld, you know, the dreams can precede reality. You know, things don't have cause and effect like the way they do in, you know, the waking sphere. And this concept that he gave to me, that love is like a rainbow-colored spider, I have no way of really deeply explaining that other than just telling you what that came up for me as, and I thought that was very interesting. And I guess maybe there's this connection that, like, there's a kind of chaos that's in love as well. You know, a mixture of, you know, painful and pretty at the same time. And yeah, that's kind of cool to think about with spiders too. Spiders have 8 legs, which is one of their defining features of all Arachnia organisms. And that's also related, I feel, to like the symbol of like chaos magic, which is the 8-pointed star. And so it represents the idea that chaos is like one of the fundamental like forces of life in the universe. That's actually life force and the chaos force are considered to be one and the same. And so I think that might have something to do with this kind of idea of love being a rainbow-colored spider, because they, you know, that is like, love can be anything. Nietzsche says that any act that's done out of love is beyond the definitions of good and evil. And so with that, I wish you a happy Father's Day if you're watching it today. And otherwise, see you the next time. And let me know what you thought in the comments. Feel free to subscribe, and we'll talk some more. And you can let me know what you want me to talk about. Thank you. Bye.